Hi, this is Wesley Lawton. I am a Grief Support Services Manager with Hospice of Michigan, and I'm the facilitator of the Men Overcoming Loss of a Spouse or Partner Grief Support Group. The group takes place virtually on Zoom as well as in person at our office in Clinton Township on the third Tuesday of each month from 6 o'clock to 7:30 p.m. So I invite you to join us and to share and to receive support from other men who are grieving this particular loss of somebody who you share your life with and likely love very deeply and are missing in a very special way, a very painful way. It can help to connect with other guys who understand a lot of the expectations that men face in this kind of a situation, as well as the grief and the way that we express feelings and all these kinds of things. And, I just want to take this chance to say that, of course, every man is different and we can't paint with too broad of a brush. There are some aspects of what one guy might consider being a man, or what the expectations are for being a man, or the way that men tend to be, that is different from another man. And so we understand that in this group. It's not like we have this specific definition of how men should be or are expected to be, and or that we have any of those kinds of expectations. However, there are a lot of certain similarities and things that we can connect on in ways that we might feel comfortable with one another rather than with others who might be joining a grief support group. If you're interested in joining a co-ed grief support group where people of any gender or situation are invited, whether it's a loss of spouse or just a general grief support group, Hospice of Michigan and Arbor Hospice, who we work very closely with, do offer those groups as well. And I encourage you to check them out. This group is for guys who especially want to connect with other guys who have lost a spouse or partner. Anyway, this is a summary of our group, which took place in October, and I just wanted to share some of the topics that were discussed and some of the insights that were shared at that group, and just in case you weren't able to go, or if you want to review it or share it with somebody who you might think it might apply to. So the first major topic that we talked about was about expanding support and finding activities in life that are meaningful. After you have a major loss, especially the loss of a partner or spouse, you find that you are redefining a lot of aspects of who you are and what your life looks like. I'm sure that I don't need to tell you this if you're going through it. I'm sure that you've recognized it pretty early on. But you have your primary loss of the person who died, and just their presence, their personality, just missing them as an individual person. But then, like a ripple, you have the secondary losses of all of the things in your life that have changed because that person has died. You might have a different role in your family. You might have new roles around the house. Probably you and your partner work together to get things done, and that may have worked very well while you were both there together. But now you're having to learn new skills and do tasks that you don't have as much practice doing because the other person used to do it. Or perhaps the loss of that caregiver role if you were taking care of her for a long time, taking care of that person. The way that other people see you, the ways that you spend your time, all kinds of things, just the things that person brought into your life that are no longer there. And so you've got to find other ways to bring those things into your life, or to let them go and replace them with something new. There are so many losses that take place in your life after the loss of a loved one. And those also will need to be grieved in time and acknowledged for what they are. And one of those things is social support. That person who died, chances are, was your main person or one of your main people who helped you through the hard times, and now they're not there to help you through those hard times. And so I hope that you watching this have a family or a network of friends or others who are there for you and who you feel comfortable talking about your grief and your loss and your loved one with. But I would say, in my experience, certainly fewer than half of guys have that. Probably less than half of people have that, from what I've seen. And that's a sad fact, but it is what it is. And so a lot of times you need to work to expand that social support network from what it is right now. So you can do that by getting in touch with people who you may have lost touch with. I recently read a research study that showed that basically, at least within the context of this study, that people who were reached out to by friends who they had lost touch with responded more positively than expected. So in other words, if there's somebody in your life, perhaps a cousin or an old friend, or even an old coworker maybe, who you connected with, who you haven't had contact with for a while, but you have their information, their phone number or their email address, whatever. Statistically, scientifically speaking, there's a good chance that they will, you reaching out to them will be well received, probably more than you would expect. You might be expecting them to be bothered or wondering, where have you been for the last however many years? But there's a good chance that it'll go better than you're anticipating. So that's one way. Of course, there are many communities that you can be involved in, whether that's a church or temple or other religious community. If that's a senior center, libraries are often a wonderful and underutilized source of different groups and activities that you can participate with. Other community centers. These are some good places to start, or at least to consider starting. Maybe something else comes to mind, and that's great too. I'm just kind of throwing out some ideas. And of course, this is all easier said than done. It's hard to reach out and connect with people. It's hard to make friends once we get past childhood or perhaps early adulthood, where we're going to school with people and sharing classes, or we don't have as much time. We don't have people taking care of us like we do in childhood. It's hard to take that step and to put in the work that it takes to form a friendship, form a relationship with somebody. And again, this is not news to you, I'm sure. But the results are worth it. So a couple of things, statistics that I think are helpful to keep in mind. One is that women tend to be more comfortable than men when it comes to reaching out for social support, when it comes to utilizing the social supports that they already have. That's why women tend to live longer than men do after the loss of a spouse. Having social support is the #1 predictor for length of life, even more than diet and exercise. Although sometimes those things go together, but even more than diet and exercise, having a satisfactory social support system in your life, having friends and family who you interact with in real time. So whether that's face-to-face or over video or even over the phone. So I'm not talking about texting. I'm not talking about social media, certainly. Not talking about radio or TV. I'm talking about real time. I'm talking, you're listening, you're responding to me in some way. Then that's the #1 predictor for length of life. And I would guess probably quality of life too, in later years. So it's especially, as men, we're fighting a very difficult challenge. And there's all kinds of reasons why that's probably the case, but that is the case. And so it does take work, but the outcomes are worth it. I encourage you to put in the work and to persevere through some of the challenges and some of the awkwardness of connecting with people. And then again, I mentioned activities as well. And you may have more time than you know what to do with. You may be living in an empty house for the first time in decades, or perhaps even ever in some situations. And that's hard to fill that empty space. Not that the empty space needs to be filled completely. There's certainly a place for silence and solitude in your life, but it's also important to have engaging activities. So perhaps there is something you used to do that life got too hectic, maybe because of caregiving or whatever reason, and you drifted away from it. If it's a hobby or an interest that you haven't pursued for a while, then that might be something that you could try to pick back up. Maybe there's something, that is coming to mind that you've always wanted to try. Of course, getting started with something new is always the hardest part. And, I say this as somebody who's given music lessons. That's a pretty good example. And you've got to be able to build up some of the skills to at least play a couple of songs on your instrument. And once you can make that initial push, which can be discouraging sometimes, because frankly, when you first start out an instrument, for example, you sound pretty bad. And that is the case until you get a pretty basic level of competency. And I'm not saying that you need to start music lessons necessarily, but I think that's a good example, a good analogy for any kind of a new hobby or skill. Or again, even forming relationships, there's that initial awkwardness that you push through, but you can also be hopeful that once you get through that initial early period, then it becomes more rewarding and more enjoyable. Okay, another topic moving on that we talked about was some of the guys were kind of contrasting and comparing their different losses or their losses with people other people in their life who weren't in the group who have had losses. And some of the things that people would say to them, like, I remember when I lost my dad and how hard that was, or, the loss of a sibling, or even the loss of another spouse. Every individual loss is different. And that's true in our group, certainly, too. Even though we're all men and we've all lost, I think in this case, they were married. Everybody in here was married. And so we can say we all lost a spouse. And all lost a wife specifically. Those are two very important commonalities, but there are probably just as many differences as there are similarities in relation or in these losses with the guys in the group. And so those are important to acknowledge and to respect. There's this great poem that I've read before in one of the videos, I believe. And it's called Whose Pain is Worse? And it's written by this woman who lost her husband. And I think it was rather sudden. And so she goes through, he lost his father. She lost her son. They had a long life together. It was early in the relationship for me. Goes through example by example and talks about some of the ways that they had an easier time than she's having. But then she also talks about some of the ways that she realizes she may be having it easier than they have it. And it comes to the conclusion of there's really no point in asking whose pain is worse. And to me, mine is worse, and to you, yours is worse. And let's just sort of give each other the space we need and be there for one another, support one another. And so I think it's a beautiful poem. If you want to look it up, if you just Google Whose Pain is Worse poem, I'm sure that it would come up. But anyway, that being said, I think it's natural to contrast and compare. And I don't think that has to be a negative activity to do. I think that it can be done in a way that's healthy. I think understanding that and respecting differences, understanding that there are, you might say, advantages and disadvantages to different types of losses as far as how hard it is to work through your grief, and that you don't have any control over what they've gone through. You had little to no control over what you're going through, probably no control and over so many aspects of it. And so there are no judgments of, you've got it easy, or you should have done this differently, right? That's hurtful. That's not helpful to anybody involved, including the person who's saying those kinds of things. So if you can put that aside, and especially I think if you can look at the ways that, honestly, that it could be worse in your situation. Another way, or a way of flipping that around would be things that you can appreciate about your situation, not about the death, not about the loss. You never have to be okay with that, in my opinion. But perhaps you are close with your kids, right? That's a big gift that a lot of people don't have. Or perhaps you don't have kids. There are some advantages to that. Not so many after a loss, but it might afford you more freedom than somebody who feels obligated to be there with their kids, right? And I'm not saying, again, that you have to feel any certain way about these things. Just giving some examples, it might be perhaps you are financially secure. That's a lot to be thankful for. Here we are coming up to Thanksgiving as I'm recording this. Perhaps you are able-bodied. You're able to use, to walk around and to see well and to drive. You have your cognitive faculties, right? There are things that we take for granted that are really gifts and that not everybody has. I'm not somebody, if you've been a part of our group, I'm not somebody who is always pushing to just be positive and look for the silver lining and don't talk about the negative stuff. Quite the opposite. But I do think that gratitude is a really important thing to try to work on and hold on to, even as you grieve. I just read this article recently and shared it. Maybe I'll share it in our next group, about how gratitude is not a denial of the pain that you're going through, but it can exist alongside that pain. You can grieve in an honest way and a real way, and yet also be grateful for the gifts that are in your life and the parts of your life that could be taken for granted. And you can enjoy and appreciate those things, even as you're working through your grief. And that certainly applies to the idea of contrasting and comparing different types of losses. And you can also have compassion for the other people in your life who are grieving and then the ways that they may have it harder than you do. And not say you understand what they're going through, just like you wouldn't want them to say that they understand exactly what you're going through. There are some positive ways to do this where we can support one another even better. Okay, and then another one that we talked about briefly was journaling. There were a couple of guys who said that they started journaling or started writing, even if it's not a daily discipline of journaling or any form of that, but they just maybe write things down, write down their thoughts and their feelings. There are different ways of doing it, and you've got to find what works for you. Speaking for myself, I am a big advocate and believer in journaling, but I have tried it on multiple occasions and it just doesn't seem to work out for me. But I do like to write when my head is swirling with thoughts, or when I have some kind of inspiration of something that I can't quite get into words. I might slow down and sit down with a pen and paper and just start writing, and it might become something comprehensible, or at least something that organizes it in my own mind. And so that's a style that has worked for me, and it might be different for you, but there are guys who just started doing this in the last month or several months, and they were just sharing how helpful it's been for them. And so that was encouraging to hear. And I've heard people, they tried it in specific ways and it hasn't worked out for them in those specific ways. But overall, I've heard so many more positive things about writing and about journaling when it comes to working through grief. And so it's always reassuring and reaffirming to hear that from others. And so it's nice to hear that in the group. Ron Grease is a devoted volunteer in our group who comes and shares from his experiences of his own loss of his wife quite a few years ago now. And he shares about it eloquently and in a way that's down to earth, but also hopeful. In fact, I have a specific event coming up in February where Ron will be sharing. It's the Wednesday, I think, or the Thursday before Valentine's Day. Feel free to get in touch with me. I can give you information about that. But anyway, where he does a presentation that he's done many times in our organization and elsewhere about his loss and about his writing and about his healing up to where he is now. So anyway, he's in our group and he's a huge advocate of writing and journaling. He ended up turning his poems and his thoughts that he wrote in his own personal journal into a book, which you can purchase, and also which we give out to the guys who are a part of our group if they're interested. So once again, it was nice to hear that affirmation that's been helpful for some of the guys in the group. And I certainly encourage you watching this to give it a try if you haven't done it. And going back to that thing about how starting something new can be hard, give it 2-3 weeks or so of trying before you make a judgment on it, because it can be kind of awkward to start something new, or maybe it'll click for you right away. Okay, the last thing was, we talked about some other resources that are available. So I mentioned about how Ron has this book, and Hospice of Michigan, or at least my department of Hospice of Michigan, choose to use some of our budget to provide that book to guys. And so wanted to make sure they know that that's available, and it is to you as well if you are a participant in our group. Unfortunately, I don't know that I could make it available to everyone who watches these videos, but if you are a part of our group, then it would be for you. And I hope that the benefit of the group goes way beyond just getting a copy of Ron's book, as helpful as that would be. And then another thing is that there's a gentleman named Tom who used to be regularly involved in our group, who lost his spouse, and he has a group that is not affiliated with Hospice of Michigan. I couldn't even tell you what day and time that group takes place, a virtual group, but it started out as this chance for the guys in this group to get together an additional time each month. And that group has continued on. It has guys there who are no longer part of our group, or maybe even who never were. Again, I don't really know, but I've heard good things about it. And I know that there are several guys who are currently members of our group who also participate with that, again, as a chance to get together twice a month, and that's virtual. And so I wanted to let you know and let the guys know that Tom has made his email address available, and he organizes that group. There's no counselor, no trained person there, as far as I know, who is facilitating the group. It's just totally peer led, but Tom organizes that from the technical aspect of the virtual group. So if you yourself are interested in connecting with that for any reason, you don't have Tom's email address, you can just get in touch with me and I can connect you with Tom. So that's all that I have for right now. Looking forward to our next group, which is right around the corner. It is next Tuesday on November 15th, next Tuesday as of this recording, which is taking place on the 9th. And look forward to seeing you there if you're able to make it. Again, it's the third Tuesday of the month from 6 to 7:30 p.m. in person in Clinton Township and online on Zoom. So it'd be great to have you there. And I hope that you would find it to be a valuable resource and experience as part of your grief journey to share it with others. So important to share your grief journey with others, whether that's in this group or another group or no group. If you have a support system, you can't just do it alone and keep it all inside. That doesn't tend to work out very well. So that is, I think, all that I have. Thank you for watching. Feel free to rewind if there's something that you want to go over again, or to share with somebody else if you'd like to. And again, thank you for your time. My contact information, you can give me a call if you're ever interested in details about the group or have questions, whatever. My number is 586-263-8514. And then my email address is wlawton@hom.org. So that's WLAWTON as in Nancy @HOM as in Michigan.org. And you can get in touch with me about the group or anything that I shared in this video. Okay. Thank you so much and take good care. Let's end the recording.